I want to talk to you about Nikola Tesla today. He was an inventor, scientist, and probably the most revolutionary, brilliant mind that the world has ever known, in my opinion. The trouble with that is, the entire time I was in school, and we talked about inventors and groundbreaking technology that changed the world forever, never was there a single mention of Nikola Tesla. There's no possible way I can explain and break down every element of this fascinating man's life in 10 or 15 minutes. I want to direct you to this book. It's called Man Out of Time by Margaret Cheney. Outstanding biography on Nikola Tesla. He was an immigrant from Serbia, and he was a very proud American citizen. He gained American citizenship legally, and he was so proud of that fact that he kept his citizenship papers with him in his private safe until the day he died. Initially, upon arrival to America, he had papers, and he had papers to work as a scientist and an engineer. This is a hands-on guy. He's being sent out to jobs. He went to work for what became General Electric, which at that time was Thomas Edison's company. He was a hands-on guy, a fix-it guy, and he could untangle messes. Edison had a cobbled up, ginormous mess of direct current power that could transmit electricity over short distances. And it became very popular very rapidly. And Edison couldn't keep up. It was just a cobbled up mess. So Tesla's being sent out in the field to fix this stuff. And he did. He had the uncanny ability, if he had a project, and this lasted most of his life, if he was involved and focused, he could go days without sleep and still maintain that focus. The project at hand, needs to be solved, we can sleep later. Or he might get 2 or 3 hours of sleep and be awakened by an idea. This is a brilliant, brilliant mind that we're talking about here. So he went to work for Thomas Edison's company, ascended the ranks, like a rocket through the night sky, because he's a freaking genius. And at one point, Edison had some problem that he couldn't solve and said there's $50,000 in it for the man who can fix this. He was just overwhelmed with all the, fires and explosions and stuff's breaking down and people are without power now, and hey, we're paying $8 a month for this stuff, which was a fortune back in the late 1800s. A monthly reoccurring bill, and now you're not getting the service? So there's 50 grand in it for the man who can fix it. Well, Tesla went out and fixed it and then presented himself for payment. And Edison told him, hey, I guess you don't understand our American sense of humor. You're not getting 50,000. No, I was just kidding. Thanks for fixing it, though. Tesla was so upset he quit on the spot. The trouble with that is, a man needs funding, if nothing else, just to live and pay the bills for sandwiches. And Tesla didn't have it. He went to work for a short time digging ditches. Imagine a man with that kind of capability in his mind on the back end of a shovel, literally digging ditches. I don't remember what he got, 30 cents a day, something like, I don't remember. Nothing. Not even barely enough to live on. But it didn't take long for a man of that intelligence to start making the right connections. And it's in the book. I can't remember how he did it, but he started making connections and he started getting investors on board. This became a lifelong problem for Tesla. You got to have investors because you got to have money to take care of the stuff, the living expenses while you're working, while you're focused on the massive project. Yeah, the bills, they got to be paid. And that went on Tesla's entire life, and it went on to haunt him. At one point, the world-esteemed scientist and genius Albert Einstein was asked by a reporter, how does it feel to be the smartest man in the world? And Einstein deadpan looked the reporter in the eye and said, I don't know. You should probably ask Nikola Tesla. Like I said, volumes of information on this guy. Brilliant mind. There was a fire in his laboratory that devastated him. Wiped out inventions, wiped out machinery. He had young volunteers coming to work for him for free because he was so smart and so good, and they'd steal his ideas. In the pursuit of some big project that Tesla would be on, he'd accidentally discover this or discover that or discover this little widget. And these little volunteers would take him and run to the patent office and patent it under their own name. They'd steal his stuff from him. He didn't, whatever, big picture. We'll worry about that later, maybe. There was a Tesla coil that he invented, little miniature doodad, and he started selling it to the medical profession. And it used diathermy through the upper layers of the skin as a rehabilitation and a healing process. And in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, these were in doctors' offices all over America. What happened to them? They clearly worked. I think they just wore out and broke down and there was no replacement. And Tesla was like, it's chump change. I got bigger fish to fry. He did. But it's stuff like that that pays the bills. So you fast forward a little bit. He gets George Westinghouse, a big-time inventor and electrical producer, gets him on board and signs a contract to produce electricity using this alternating current patent that Tesla came up with, devised the machinery for. Now you could transmit electricity over great distances with substations. Tesla figured all this stuff out. He said he knew when he came up with the idea, he was reciting poetry and taking a walk with a friend, and it just hit him in a flash. He took a stick and drew it out in simplistic terms in the dirt. This is how it works, and this is what does this. His friend had no idea what he was talking about. Tesla had the whole thing figured out in his head, even down to the wearable parts and what would wear out first. He saw all of it in a flash. I think the contract through Westinghouse paid him something $2.50, $3 per kilowatt hour. Well, at the start, now he's got funding. But as his system clearly was the better system, better than Edison's, better than direct current. No matter, there's a whole thing with the current wars, and Edison was shocking elephants with alternating current, trying to convince people it was unsafe, and his system was better. Well, it wasn't. Didn't matter. The better product won in the end. All of a sudden, people are jumping on board. Yeah, sign me up for some electric here in the house. We'll put in an outlet or two. All these kilowatt hours started adding up. Well, George Westinghouse at some point decided to sell his company, and the investors buying that said, yeah, we'll buy it. There's one problem. You've got to get rid of the Tesla patents because you owe him a fortune. Westinghouse brought it in front of Tesla, told him the predicament is in, and can we work something out? And supposedly Tesla said, Mr. Westinghouse, you believed in me when nobody else would and gave me the funding to get my start, and I haven't forgotten that. And he supposedly took out the contract that they had between the two of them and tore it up and relinquished any further claim he had for royalty payments on the generation of electricity. That came back to haunt him later as well. We're talking about the late 1800s here. He was doing scientific demonstrations and experiments that blew people's mind. It's all documented. It's not like this is a fictional character or, some of the stories, and some of the stories are a little, you don't know if they're quite true or not. What we do know is he made the inventions. We have pictures of Samuel Clemens in his lab, aka Mark Twain. They were friends. He was like a pop star. He was everywhere. He was being interviewed by magazines. And he got a little bit arrogant, and deservedly so. I mean, he's a brilliant man, and he's changed the world now. You had the 1893 Columbian expedition, where people could go, I believe it was in Chicago. They could go at night now because they could see. It was his inventions that powered and lit up the entire exposition. Nobody, before that, if it was dark, you had to go home because it's dark. You couldn't see anything. Tesla made it where you could see for the world. By 1899, he went to Colorado Springs, Colorado, because of the elevation and the clear air, to do some bizarre, wild experiments with electricity and high voltage. People around that area said you could hear the thunderclaps 10 miles away. Horses were stampeding because they were being shocked through their metal shoes because he's transmitting power. They don't know what he's doing. Colorado Springs welcomed him as an esteemed scientist, and he's chosen our little town here to do these. That came back to haunt him too. We'll get to that. He caused an earthquake in New York using the Tesla coil. He attached it to a skyscraper that was in construction. It's a steel frame now. And through mechanical resonance, it sent a charge down in the earth and came back, and when it hit his coil, it resonated again and magnified, doubled the charge, and back and forth. And within 3 minutes, this whole structure is swaying. And a couple blocks away, the ground shook. It was in the newspapers. He caused an earthquake. And when they asked him about it, he said it was an accident. I didn't know that was going to happen. But knowing what I know now, if I so chose to, I could split the earth in two like an apple. He was selected by Westinghouse to harness the power of Niagara Falls, which he did successfully, and provide electricity for, 80,000 residents, something like that. That apparatus is still in effect today. I think they've had to rebuild parts of it, but my gosh, 1900-ish. There's trouble with funding. Constantly running out of money, constantly not having enough money. Got all the ideas in the world. If you just had the funding and the time, where you didn't have to piddle. A guy like Tesla somehow should have a support system that pays, like government grants are now, except it wouldn't be wasted on the mating schedules of groundhogs or whatever, or gender studies in Pakistan. You're funding brilliance that can help the world. Take care of all the pilly stuff. Pay the bills. I got work to do, and we're going to churn it out, baby, because I don't have to worry about that peddly stuff. Tesla didn't have that luxury. He ends up getting hooked up with J.P. Morgan, who was a Satanist involved, and I don't even want to get into it. Banker. Initially, Morgan was on board. I think he gave him $100,000 or something like that. Tesla started building the Wardenclyffe Tower. And this was to be one of several towers throughout the earth who would transmit massive amounts of electrical energy for free to anybody that wanted to get a hold of it. And once J.P. Morgan, who was a massive investor in power lines and power transmission companies, once he got wind of that, no sir, that was the end of the funding. Tesla pleaded with him for money. It wasn't that he didn't have it, he just wasn't going to give it to him. Wasn't going to loan it to him. And all of a sudden, Colorado Springs, out of nowhere, 15 years later or whatever it was, sent him a bill for all of the electricity that he used in his experiments there in 1899, over $100,000. Oh, by the way, Mr. Esteemed Scientist, that we welcomed you as a guest and provided for you. Oh, you suddenly, yeah, you got to pay for the electric you used. He never stopped inventing his whole life. By age 75, he had proposed what now we know as geothermal heating. Brilliant mind. Never stopped. He just never had the proper funding. January 7th of 1943, Tesla died in his sleep in a hotel room. Hotel was being paid for by something, or they let him live on his name. I don't know. And this wasn't just a little hotel room. He had 2 living quarters, basically. Died in his sleep. Somebody called the FBI. Now, why would the FBI be called for a private citizen that had passed away? And they were there on the spot. A locksmith was called, and they broke the lock on Tesla's private safe to examine the papers. I mean, the body's hardly cold, and they're already getting their noses in. Tesla had trunks and barrels, about 80 trunks actually, and 30-ish barrels of papers and drawings and all the stuff that he didn't get to produce while he was alive because of a lack of funding. And the FBI has control of all of it. 2 days after his death, the Office of Alien Persons gets involved, and they seize all of the estate of Nikola Tesla. Now, why would the Office of Alien Persons be involved at all? Tesla was an American citizen. Dr. John G. Trump was called to examine Tesla's papers, which he did over a period of 3 days, and came out and released the findings and said there's not really anything of value or interest here, and nothing dangerous that could fall into enemy hands. There was talk of a death ray and war weapons. He was a peaceable man. He didn't care about war. He didn't want war. What he did want was funding, and eventually he turned to the government trying to secure that, and he was never successful. But Trump looked through everything, nothing there. And yes, this is a Trump related to former President Trump. Just a few short years later, Dr. John G. Trump comes out with groundbreaking revolutionary technology developments in high voltage machinery, navigational radar, precision bombing radar, defense systems, becomes a millionaire, all of it having to do with high voltage technology. And that just happened to be Nikola Tesla's specialty. Out of those 80 trunks, 20 of them went missing. Nobody knows where they are. There's a whole chain of letters that have to be accessed through the Freedom of Information Act, and they denied that they ever had them or ever got them. But later they say, well, while we were in possession of them, well, which is it? Nobody knows. Nobody's held accountable. These trunks just disappeared. Tesla died with no will. He left his estate to his former home country, what is now Yugoslavia. They piddled around for a month or 3 and then sent what was left, what they didn't keep. They sent that back to Yugoslavia. You can see his stuff in a museum there now if you can get to Yugoslavia. Fascinating, brilliant man. I highly recommend that book. Man Out of Time, it's called. Margaret Cheney. Hey, thanks for watching. I do appreciate your time. I'll see you next time.